This week, Lume Cube announced version 2.0 of their wildly popular LED modular lighting system. Let's take a look. I've been using these cubes for maybe about 6 months now, and actually they're turned out to be very versatile. I'm using them in almost every aspect of my photography and videography work. They are so easy to use. I base mount them to gimbals like the Osmo and the Ronin for doing event shots. They are small enough that I can shoe mount them on top of the camera for tracking and following subjects. I mount them on my drones for twilight and night flights. I use them in studio for everything from product photography to fill lights to special effects, you name it. They're incredibly rugged, waterproof, extremely bright, 1500 lumens. So again, I find that these things are, I use them all the time. Well, that sounds perfect, doesn't it? But in reality, there's always shortcomings. With every product, there are design compromises, and this is no exception. The first thing that a compromise that annoys me all the time is the brightness control. It's a single button, and you can only ramp up through to the brightest setting, and then it cycles back to the bottom again. And that's the only way you can change the brightness. You can't change the brightness downward. You have to cycle through. So in the studio, that's not a big problem because I can work around that, as awkward as it is. On location, it's more of a problem because I don't want to brighten things up and distract other people. For video work, it is completely unacceptable because I may be transitioning from a low light area like a den to a brighter area like a sunroom, in which case I want to slowly drop the artificial lighting down so I don't have to keep correcting that in post. And when I get to those situations, I got to basically toss the Lume Cube to the side and get a traditional panel that has a potentiometer to lower that brightness. So that's a bit of annoyance for me. Now, the button on the Lume Cube is not the only way to change the brightness. It is a Bluetooth enabled device, and it comes with an app for your phone or your tablet. I can simply slide this slider back and forth and change the brightness of the Lume Cube I'm using to record this. You can also do some other things with it. You can turn on strobes and change the strobe speed. So that's an option that allow you to make the Lume Cube brightness control work a little bit to your favor if you've got the ability to pair this up and have one more device on set or on location. So it's not perfect, but it does give you that functionality. The other thing I don't like about the original Lume Cube is if I do need full brightness, it only lasts 20 minutes. So for a wedding reception where the lighting is really, really low and I'm not going to be right up in the bride's face as she cuts the cake, I'm going to need all the brightness I can get, and I can't miss the shot. So even though it says over 20 minutes, I really only get 20, and of that, I really can only use them for about 15 minutes safely, because when they get low, there's no indicator here, there's no LED indicator that says, hey, by the way, it's about time for you to change me out. It starts flashing the light, and it does the same thing when it gets hot, and that just will completely ruin the shot. So I really have to limit the use of these at full power to about 15 minutes and then swap them out for another one. Version 2 sort of addresses that brightness control by actually changing around the programming of the two buttons, the same two buttons as before, but they function differently. Now you can use the left and right button as a up and down brightness button, so may be able in some circumstances to use the Lume Cube where I was swapping it out for a different light before. The new Lume Cube has a new battery design and a USB Type-C charging port, so it has 1.5 hours, 90 minutes supposedly of runtime at full power. That's going to make it far more usable for those kinds of events. And the USB port makes it able to charge in 45 minutes, they say, with the appropriate power source, of course. I know some other changes and improvements that I'll talk about briefly. One is the new LED chip that they're using. This one is color balanced to 5700 Kelvin, where the original Lume Cube was 6000. So the original Lume Cube was slightly different color than most speed lights or studio strobes. This one's going to be a much closer match, which will avoid any kind of mixed color situations. It's also CRI rated 95 plus. That makes it very, very consistent light we'll have to put that to the test when we get some of those in. And they've changed the beam angle from 60 degrees out to 80 degrees. And I'm not sure I'm gonna like that, but we're gonna compare the two of them. They say with this new lens design that it has fewer hot spots and a better fall off. So it should be a much more natural looking light than what we're seeing here. A feature that I'm really excited to play around with is the new low light mode. Now, most LEDs can only drop to about 10%, and it has to do with the way LEDs work. I'm sorry I'm gonna get a little geeky here, but I really love the science behind this stuff. LEDs can only emit light at a single power strength, brightness. And we perceive them as dimmable because they pulse them on and off. There's a little circuit on board the light that pulses the LED on and off at different rates, different pulse widths, to give us a perception of lower intensity light. But you get to about 10% full power, and what happens is the diode requires enough current punching into the back of it to eventually turn that electrical energy into photons, and below that certain threshold they don't perform very well. They start to misbehave. So what you have to do is, in order to get LEDs to function lower than 10%, is put much more complex circuitry on board. So you can see here's about a 90% brightness. As you can see, the pulse is just about on all the time. Here at 50%, you can see the current is pulsing half the time, and at 10%, it's way down here like this, little spikes. So in order to get below 10%, what they have to do is use much more complicated circuitry that basically cuts out some of these 10% current spikes and drops it below it. So that this sort of feature is typically only been found in Hollywood grade LED panels that are much, much pricier. So I'm very excited to be able to use this in low light situations like time lapses or long exposures, or just for a simple fill light where the Lume Cube by itself at 10% is just too bright for that particular setting. The charge indicator on the original Lume Cube was a kind of little red thing underneath the rubber seal, and it was hard to read from any kind of distance, so I'd always have to walk up to my charging station and see whether this thing had been charged or not. They created a little lens here for that LED, a little green LED to pop nice and bright when it's charged, so I should be able to see that from a distance. And I'm also hoping, although I can't find it in their documentation, that maybe that thing would turn red as it's starting to get close to running out of juice at the current power level, so I know when to take it off and swap it out and not have to worry about the thing starting to flash the main strobe as my only indicator that I've ruined the shot. And before, if you wanted to use this as an optically triggered slave flash, the little sensor was right here in the front, which made it problematic for some scenes. You have to basically illuminate your subject with your main light. That light would have to return back and find the sensor, be able to have this thing trigger. And so in a lot of circumstances, that didn't work right. By the time the light got back, it had fallen off to the point it didn't trigger. I found that not useful for me for almost every occasion. They've now moved that sensor up to the top of the unit, so it should give me 360-degree visibility into the source strobe to be able to trigger, and maybe that's going to be a lot more useful optically triggered flash. And finally, I want to look at the price of this thing. I would have thought that this would have been priced maybe 50% above the current market rate of the original Lume Cube, but to be honest, it's less than $10 more. And it comes bundled with a few of the accessories, the accessory frame that clips on the front here, magnetically attached CTO gel diffuser, and even a small adapter to go from the 1/4 screw to a shoe. When you work those little accessories in, it actually ends up being cheaper than the original. And in fact, the original is not even on their website anymore as orderable. So if you like the original for maybe a couple of reasons, I mentioned the beam angle being a little bit tighter on the original, 60 degrees versus 80 on this new one. And the new one's only rated for 30 feet underwater, where the original was rated for 100 feet. So if you're a diver and you like these things, you might want to go run out and get yourself some of the originals while they still have stock. That's my preview video, guys. I can't wait to get a couple of these and compare them side by side with the original Lume Cube. Help folks figure out whether it makes sense to upgrade to these new ones or not. If you liked what you heard here today, then please do hit the like button down below. If you want to follow up with me when the Lume Cube 2.0 comes in, please subscribe and hit the little bell down below so you get notified when that video becomes available. For Images by Design, I'm Jim Setzer. Have a fantastic day.